accomplish more than about 35 or 40 miles a day in the saddle, so as not to tire out yourself, let alone your horse, and you'd never ride any faster in the saddle than about 5 miles an hour. That is a comfortable pace over a long distance. If you tried to ride 6, 7 miles an hour over a long distance, rest you assured, you'll soon find it unsettling to the digestion. And consider most people across the globe do not even own a horse to ride so comfortably. Most people across this globe travel one place to the other. How so? By foot. Yes, your God-given method of transportation, your own 2 feet. It will take you comfortably 3 miles an hour. But you know, in the saddle, I began to ponder, after all of these years, the calculation of the average rate of speed upon the globe as I know it between the minority, those privileged to own the advantage of a fine riding horse, to hitch it up to an elegant phaeton, and the majority, those who have not the advantage, but who travel comfortably 3 miles an hour. And there you are. It still remains a 4-mile-an-hour world. That is the world that I know. I know of no place upon the globe where you can travel any faster than a ship at sea or a horse on land. And yet that is not to deny that we've made remarkable improvements throughout my lifetime. And I am referring, of course, to that steam-empowered mechanical device. Do you know the very first one engaged upon our continent here was simultaneous in 2 distinct places, separated by several hundred miles? On the upper Potomac, across from Shepherdstown, and on the Delaware River, right there in Philadelphia. Of course, the effort was, having created this device, to be placed in a boat allows it a steady advance against the vagaries of any current or winds. Much more efficient upon water than you might find it so upon land. Do you know neither of those contrivances, the one engaged by a Virginian, James Rumsey, on the upper Potomac, the other engaged by a Philadelphian, John Fitch, neither of those could travel against the current any quicker than one could travel on horseback. A short distance later, one decided, a good friend of mine, very wealthy Philadelphian, a tobacconist, Thomas Leeper, contrived a method of placing a steam engine, as he called it, in a cart. He placed the cart on 2 rails parallel that it might propel itself forward. Is that not ingenious? Of course, to make any distance, you'd have to cut a swath, would you not, across the land and the terrain? So much more difficult than employed upon the water. But that could not travel any greater distance than one could achieve speed on horseback. I know you're thinking, Jefferson, get modern. There have been greater advances. A good friend of mine, my fellow collaborator on our Declaration of American Independence, Robert R. Livingston, collaborated with our mutual friend, Robert Fulton. They improved the steam engine. They placed it in a boat on the Hudson River to sail the distance between the port of New York and Albany City, a distance of 150 miles. And will we ever get over it? It made that distance in 36 hours. Is that not phantasmagorical? I cannot help but ponder what's next. What is right around the corner? What may happen in the next century, the next 2 centuries, particularly in our government devised to allow a greater freedom for the pursuit of science than has heretofore been known in human history? Do you know it is right there in our Constitution? One of the duties of our legislative body is the pursuit of science and the arts. To think, indeed, what may happen in the next century, the next 2 centuries, the 21st century, can you imagine that? With what rapidity we might travel. And yet imagine the improvement in communications. At present, someone in Albany may know what has occurred in the port of New York within 36 hours. Extraordinary. But I say this with a caveat. In the next century or the next 2 centuries, may we be traveling too fast. And the result, of course, our past, thereby the travel too rapidly behind us, that we might forget more easily what has occurred yesterday, and therefore become somewhat unacquainted how to steady that rudder to maintain an equidistance steadily into the future. That is my concern. The more so as I travel back here to reflect upon the most extraordinary history that I was able to bear witness and to begin my study of a universal system of education while I was a young man right here, that someday we might have the opportunity throughout our nation, now as I know it, at 18 states, to provide an education unto the poor as well as the wealthy, the female as well as the male. Do you know how well that will strengthen our nation more than anything else? That a child in Massachusetts may be able to converse with a child in Georgia, those two young individuals to speak with children here in Virginia, as well to speak westward now into Ohio and Louisiana, Indiana. How much closer, how much stronger our nation will be able to come together and move forward for the benefit of whom? Everyone.
Everyone, Commonwealth.
The people. That is why, in my opinion, education must receive the first and foremost interest and impetus of our government. Now, I can tell you, having the privilege as a young man here to attend the Old Royal College, the privilege to continue on in reading law, and the privilege to be elected to my first public office here in this city, I recognized how important education must be, and particularly if we can achieve it, what do you think is the first and foremost course that should be employed in that system of education? What course is the most important to be employed?
History.
History. For history, by reminding us of the past, allows us to better understand where we are in the present and the greater hope to move forward, because as the greatest nation upon the globe, founded upon principle, not upon monarchy nor aristocracy, but a natural aristocracy dedicated to one fulfilling their capacity, living up, if you will, to their talents bestowed upon each and every one of us, different, not by any ruler, not by any government, but rather by nature and nature's God. We, the people, are at the helm of this ship of state, are we not? We ought to be. And thereby we sail through uncharted waters. Man has never been here before. So how important our past must remain in order to help us to steer more steadily into the unknown. When I returned here, I cannot help but of three particular individuals who have remained of great influence in my life. This indeed was my oyster here for 20 years. First and foremost, my teacher at the Old Royal College, Dr. William Small. I do not know whether any of you have heard of Dr. Small. He was a Scot, educated at the University of Edinburgh. He took his oath of allegiance to the Old Royal College. For, if you recall, we were not only governed by the monarchy of England, we were governed by their church, the Church of England, and it was my great and good fortune to fall under his tutelage for 2 years, a little more than 2 years. Of him I have written continually a tripartite description of his good character. First and foremost, he had gentlemanly and correct manners. As we move forward into the future, let us not forget, as the Romans said, manners make the man. Manners is the true art of simply learning how to live with one and the other. The art of showing respect. Rest you assured how important that is in a free society where man has never been more free to hold his opinion as he should choose and to proffer it accordingly. We had great respect for Dr. Small, and it was by a very simple formula. Dr. Small had great respect for whom?
Everyone.
His students. He realized each and every one of us is a new mind, never seen before upon this globe, ready to be provoked in the intellect, inspired in the imagination. Secondly, as I have written, he had an enlarged and liberal mind. Do you know, I made the statement the other day to a young boy, and he wagged his finger at me saying, "Mr. Jefferson, do not become political." I beg your pardon. Why? Well, you said the word liberal. Well, indeed I did. I said, and what is the definition of liberal? From the Latin word libertas. Thank you. Why the hesitation? Boldly pronounce freedom, liberty. There's nothing more free in the human animal than one's mind.
Choosing.
And who knew that better than the grandfather of education? You know of whom I am referring to? Socrates. Socrates. Astounding, lest we forget. Socrates was to gather his students under the shade of the tree in his garden, and there he would provoke them with questions upon all subjects, no subject unworthy to be attended to. We are a curious creature. How are we going to know unless we ask? And how important this was for Socrates, lest we forget. He was blind. How would he know unless he asked? And therefore the challenge of his students to describe that world about him, that he might be able to see it in his mind's eye, and the further challenge that he had to his students, once engaged in open and free inquiry, you are the further empowered to become engaged in your society. You know that's why he was incarcerated. Because he provoked his students to become engaged, that they had a liberty to do so in their own society. What would society be without them in it? Education is that element of provocation, to provoke, if you will, young minds, new minds. For what? A better world, particularly for those yet unborn. And thirdly, as I have written, Dr. Small had a curious attention for good humor. He was able to provoke one with an enjoyment in education. That we enjoyed education to the extent that outside of his classroom, further curiosities were there for us to pursue. You know, I must say, as I dismounted out of doors, I took off my riding boots, dusted myself off, and wondered whether I would be observed by you as probably dusty, musty from the saddle, perhaps peculiarly apparelled. I conjured up an apology until I entered here. And gazing amongst you all, I wondered, why should I now apologize for the way I'm attired? I've always believed in dressing for comfort, but you overwhelm me. Here I find I'm the overdressed, quite different from what I wore when I was a young boy here, but lest you think if I've meandered into the subject of fashion and style in this exposition, we often preoccupy opinions, do we not, upon matters merely of fashion and style. It's a delight of our human nature, and perhaps some of you have read as I have written, in matters of fashion and style, simply swim with the current. But in matters of principle, stand like a rock. And that is what we are discussing, are we not? The principles of an educated citizen body. Does that not round out that greatest of all offices? Citizen. For without it, not one office in our government can be seated. Do you know, I had the good fortune, after I left the tutelage of Dr. Small, to enter into the reading of law with Mr. Witt, George Witt, here in this city for 3 years. On the average, a boy read for 3 years. You could read for 4 or 5 years, should you choose. You could read for less. In fact, it said Patrick Henry only read law for about 6 months, which I think is erroneous. I think it was more like 6 weeks. He never had precise citation, but he had the most remarkable talent of speechifying of anyone I've ever known. But Mr. Witt, if you will, rounded my continuing education out with a respect for law. Respect that was well understood back in the darkest of ages, when the barons gathered on Runnymede and even stated the monarch should not be above the law. The laws of nature and nature's God are constant, are they not? That is the foundation of our Declaration of American Independence. Many even question it now. They said, Mr. Jefferson, who said all men are created equal. Yes. Well, are we? Well, no. We're not created equal in face and form. It is to your great advantage, madam, you bear no resemblance to me. Are we created equal in mental capacity?
No.
No, some of us are of minds more acute, others we have to take our time. But are we all born equal in nature?
Nature.
Yes, we are. We're all born free in nature, as the flora and the fauna. That is the laws of nature, nature's God. However, we are born into the laws of man. And therein is the conundrum and often the contradiction. Mr. Wythe helped me to understand through 3 years of reading law that we should never deny law is living and breathing. It continues to grow as we grow. We should never expect to go back to the ages of the darkest ignorance to find the greatest enlightenment, or to think that anything that was created in the past cannot be improved upon in the present, nor the more so into the future. He helped me to understand what is but common sense. A child of 14 cannot wear the same clothes at the age of 40. So our laws and institutions must grow as we grow as the people. Mr. Wythe helped me to understand the genius of Gouverneur Morris. Oh, at first I could hardly comprehend it. But it was Mr. Wythe's influence that helped me to understand his genius, for he was the author of the preamble of our Constitution of these United States. I was not here at the time. I was 3,000 miles removed. And when I received the first draft of the Constitution in a letter sent me by my good friend, James Madison, I wrote back to him, I'm astounded by this. Madison knew I was not in favor of a more secure and solid system of a federal government. I thought the Articles of Confederation were a venerable fabric. They ought not to be tampered with. Madison, who has changed my mind on many subjects, the most luminous mind I've ever known, helped me to realize this is extraordinary, the shortest document of its kind in human history, creating a government to check its own power. Do you know that is the most remarkable thing about our system of government? Whenever our government comes to a stalemate, cannot make up their mind, which is natural, the nation continues to move forward. It is not a royal decree where everything comes to a standstill. And who leads the nation forward? Not the government, but the people. That is the most extraordinary element in our system of government. And it astounded me that Morris had written the first sentence. What is the first sentence in the preamble, the first sentence of our Constitution?
We the people.
Now, there's the conundrum, is it not, madam? Because who amongst us here this day have no voice in the government as I know it? Women have no voice, no vote. Who else?
Slaves.
Not only the enslaved, anyone of color.
Color.
A mulatto, one of a particular hue from a foreign land who has every right under nature and nature's God to come here and better their condition. Others? A white male, 21 years of age or older, who holds no property is not represented, and a white male, 21 years of age or older, who may hold property but is mortgaged, is not represented. Now, there's the question then. Who are we the people? Well, lest we despair, do not forget where we've been. It used to be worse. One of the requisites, you had to be a white male, 21 years of age or older, a freeholder, and Protestant. Christian. Yeah. Anyone know who changed all that? You. Thank you. Right here in Virginia, beginning with our statute of Virginia for religious freedom, the impetus in our very first amendment. The extraordinary element of our Constitution is its capacity to live and breathe and grow as we grow, as the people. That's why that very first line is brilliant. It opens the people to question who they are, particularly to fulfill their capacity under the laws of nature and nature's God, that we might imitate those laws in the improvement of our system of laws. This is what Mr. Wythe helped me to regard and to realize. And thirdly, of all of the influence here, I cannot help but come to town and remember Peyton Randolph, my mother's first cousin. He was the president of the Continental Congress, the first president of the Congress, but before that he was greatly regarded as the Speaker of our House of Burgesses here in Williamsburg. It was under his guidance that I was first elected as a Burgess representing Albemarle County. Now, what makes him still, in my mind, so special is the fact, first and foremost, he knew the true definition of politician, lest we forget. One who engages the art of
Compromise.
The true definition of a politician is one who engages the art of compromise, and the more successful they are, they move to become what? Beyond the mere title of a politician, they become a statesman. A statesman. Those truly who lead the nation forward on behalf of the people. Peyton Randolph, I will never forget, through all of the public offices that I have had, let alone offices of appointment, to have a regard to the people, to continue to make improvements, to continue to move forward and not to allow a moment to fall backward. So that is what brings me here once more to reflect upon this special place. And if you would allow me one more comment before I seek your curiosities, never to forget that through the years as people question me, Mr. Jefferson, what date do you think our nation truly began? Was it the 4th of July, 1776? Well, I played no small part on that day because as author of the Declaration of our American Independence, that was the day the Declaration was actually resolved. But Mr. Adams from Massachusetts will tell you differently. He will say our nation began on July 2nd. With the successful vote for independence. He says that is the date we ought to recognize every year with masked bands, bonfires, and parades. But you know, a Virginian will disagree, as they usually do. A Virginian will tell you our nation began on May 15th, 1776. Do you all know what happened here? Lest we forget, here in Williamsburg, Virginia, on May 15th. On that day, Virginia became the first of all of the colonies to pronounce its independence. But more importantly,
Commonwealth. That you were
on that date, after they proclaimed their independence, their very first business was to draft a resolution for independence to be delivered 300 miles northwards into the Continental Congress of delegates representing all of our colonies. They are pronouncing, as Virginia had taken the first step forward, may her sister colonies vote to follow. I was seated in Philadelphia that day. I will never forget the immediate consternation caused when my good friend, Colonel Richard Henry Lee, read that resolution of Virginia. Imagine the delegates of Little Rhode Island and the Providence plantations, even smaller Delaware, thinking that they should own up to follow the impetus provided by the largest, the wealthiest, the most populated of all the colonies, until suddenly they realized this has been achieved by the largest, the wealthiest, the most populated of all the British colonies. If mighty Virginia could reconcile its own internal divisiveness. Remember that? Between the Tidewater gentry, who continued to inherit vast amounts of property because they were simply elder sons under the laws of primogeniture and entail. And yet their younger brothers, recognizing their innate right to better their condition, migrating westward, hacking their way out of the wilderness, proving the more progressive of that internal strife, that had to reconcile itself. Not for one or specifically the other, but for whom? Everyone, in order for Virginia to move forward. President Hancock recognized this will not happen overnight, so he created the entire Congress as a committee of the whole. Do you know what that means in parliamentary procedure? That the entire representative body then becomes a committee unto itself to study and question in open and free inquiry how this particular resolution will be applicable to each and every one of those colonies. And to help the committee of the whole in their investigation, he appointed another committee of 5 men to draft a Declaration of American Independence, should it be necessary. It was not a fait accompli. Anyone remember the names of the 5 men on the committee? Thank you.
Adams.
John Adams,
Franklin.
Roger Sherman, Franklin, and Robert R. Livingston, aforementioned. Now, if you've never thought of this before, Mr. Adams is from?
Massachusetts.
Very good. Mr. Sherman was from?
Connecticut.
Mr. Livingston?
New York.
Dr. Franklin?
Pennsylvania.
Mr. Jefferson.
Virginia.
The only one on the committee south of the line drawn by Messrs. Mason and Dixon. When we gathered on the 11th of June to decide who should take up the pen, all eyes immediately looked unto whom?
You. No, Adams.
I was not dry behind the ears. Dr. Franklin, he was our elder. Our mentor, in many ways, one of the wealthiest men in all of North America, had resided in London a good 17 years, pleading our cause before he returned to be seated in the Second Congress, convened the spring of '75. And I remember Dr. Franklin stating, "Gentlemen, I thank you for the honorarium, but I fear I'm growing too old to have anything else I may write suffer the scrutiny of a committee." And he looked at me the same time Mr. Adams did. It was Adams. Adams who said, "Gentlemen, I do believe Mr. Jefferson may write as well as anyone in Congress, including me. But gentlemen, lest we forget, a Virginian ought to be at the head of this business." Do you know why? Beg pardon? Precisely. Where did the business begin?
In Virginia.
Right here where you're all seated, in Williamsburg, Virginia, through proper parliamentary procedure and attention to the law, regard to doing it correctly and justly. I think that's the best example, is it not, of how we answered the impositions placed upon us by a government 3,000 miles removed. It was their system that we used. Well, I thank you for allowing me the liberty of pronouncing my opinions. You've been most kind in providing the floor, but for the time we have left, will you allow that the floor be theirs for a few queries?
For a few queries, but I figure I'm going to actually introduce Bill Barker to you all. And